For years, one of the strangest things in hockey happened every game night in Toronto. The Maple Leafs had a superstar, a Calder Trophy winner, a 48-goal scorer, a 4-time Stanley Cup champion, and the fans hated him. They booed him when he scored. They booed him when he touched the puck. Sometimes, they booed him just for stepping onto the ice. It was spring 1963. The Maple Leafs had won their second consecutive Stanley Cup. 150,000 people had turned out to watch the victory parade and celebration. The entire Maple Leafs team stood atop the steps of Toronto's old City Hall. One by one, the names of the players were announced to raucous cheers. Armstrong, Bauer, Horton. Cheers and applause. Kelly, Keon. Cheers and applause. Mahovlich. A cascade of boos rained down at the mention of the club's resident scoring star. Roll call continued. Eddie Shack, Alan Stanley. Cheers and applause. All the good teams had their own superstars. Howe, Hull, Rocket Richard. Even the Rangers had Andy Bathgate. The Maple Leafs had the Big M. He had beaten out Bobby Hull for the Calder Trophy. He outscored Gordie Howe's pace after 3 years. By year 4, he was on track to shatter Rocket Richard's single-season record. He had 36 goals after 40 games, then 40 after 50, then 45 after 60. With a little push, he could still make it. On a breakaway late in the season against Chicago, Mahovlich let loose with a shot from 10 feet out. Boom! The puck bounced off the end boards. He finished with 48, a new Leafs record. It didn't matter. Boom Boom Geoffrion passed him for the league lead during the last month of the season and hit 50. He'd even missed 6 games. When it was over, Leafs fans didn't remember the accomplishment. They remembered what they considered to be a failure. It didn't help that in baseball that same season, Roger Maris broke Babe Ruth's home run record. After that, the autograph seekers shied away and dried up. To compound matters, his follow-up seasons of 33, 36, and 26 goals were considered flops. It didn't matter that those totals were the second, third, and sixth best in the league in those years. Leafs fans were impatient for their 50-goal season. If he'd skated around like a madman, he would have been accepted. He would have been loved, but his effortless skating style and relatively lower stamina gave fans the impression that he was lazy. Sometimes he took a moment to consider his options with the puck, which looked like a lack of intensity. He got saddled with the reputation of someone who could be great when he felt like it, which wasn't often enough. He'd been held scoreless in Toronto's playoff run in 1963. Never mind that he was playing on a wrenched knee, then contracted influenza, and only missed 1 game. If you were Frank Mahovlich, the booing had to bother you. Mahovlich played through it. The real problem was Punch Imlach. Punch was not a player's coach. He never gave Mahovlich his public backing. On the contrary, Imlach's public comments acted as a billows to the boos. Imlach purposefully mispronounced his name and questioned Mahovlich's work ethic. Imlach once told the media, "Hockey is a streetcar named Desire. In too many days, Mahovlich doesn't catch the train." Some of the fans ate this stuff up, figuring if it came from the coach who watched him every day in practice, it had to be true. Soon, Mahovlich was on a treadmill of internal criticism and public rejection. Imlach's abuse was relentless. Later, the coach claimed he did it to motivate Mahovlich, but also admitted it didn't work. Still, he kept at it. And through it all, Mahovlich never lost his temper, never said something he regretted later. He internalized it. After a while, his Leafs teammates assumed he was just a quiet guy. At the beginning of the 1964-65 season, the Leafs were reigning 3-time Stanley Cup champs. By mid-November, they'd lost only 3 of 12 games, and Mahovlich had 12 points. The boos continued. By November 12, 1964, Mahovlich had finally had enough of it. He checked himself into the hospital with exhaustion. Fans and media were nonplussed. It was reported that Mahovlich had been admitted to Toronto General Hospital on an emergency basis and was allowed no visitors. No details were given. In the vacuum, there was much speculation. Some suggested he was in for cancer treatment. After a week or two, he resumed practicing away from the Leafs. His wife would drive him to practice with a local varsity team. Those who watched him there said he looked stronger and faster than ever. After practice, Mahovlich held an impromptu press conference in the skating rink parking lot. He told the press that he felt fine. Moments later, his wife drove him back to the hospital. Speculation increased. When asked for details, Mahovlich would refer back to the doctors. When questioned, the doctors would volley back to Mahovlich. When reporters pressed the team, Imlach declined comment, citing medical advice. When they pressed the hospital, officials said only that no public statement would be made. At the time, it was considered essential that the nature of Mahovlich's condition remain undisclosed. At the beginning of December, Mahovlich was released from hospital. He resumed practicing with the Leafs. On December 9th came the big test, his first game back. When the public address announcer called his name before puck drop, the Maple Leafs faithful gave Mahovlich a loud and long standing ovation. Despite missing those 11 games, Mahovlich ended up leading the team in scoring. It didn't happen all at once, but eventually, little by little, the boos started up again. In a home game on November 1st, 1967, Mahovlich was named second star with 3 points in a 5-0 drubbing of the Montreal Canadiens. When he skated out to center ice to take a bow, he did it to a soundtrack of boos. The next morning, the team boarded a train for Detroit. Something had been gnawing at Mahovlich, and he could no longer ignore it. He got up out of his seat, told teammates that he wouldn't be joining them, then got off the train. He went straight back to the hospital. This time, they didn't try to hide what was going on. Headlines blared exhaustion, tension, and depression in all caps. His condition was considered serious. Once again, he was allowed no visitors and no phone calls. Some worried he'd never play again. Others saw it as flakiness. The Leafs team doctor asked reporters to avoid speculation altogether, saying the reasons being discussed publicly were nowhere close to the truth. Imlach was done with him this time. It seemed that everybody in Toronto saw a big, strong guy and wanted him to be aggressive. But Mahovlich was shy and introverted. Even still, he stood just outside the top 10 in all-time goal scorers. It was never enough. When he returned to the lineup on December 2nd, there was no ovation this time, just a cold reception that eventually deteriorated into more boos and indifference. In March of 1968, he was traded to Detroit. There he seemed to come out of his shell, becoming a vocal locker room presence and increasing his scoring. For more on this period of Mahovlich's career, see our previous video. Mahovlich later referred to the 4 years between hospitalizations as the worst period of his life. Imlach had been good to him until after the 48-goal season. Afterwards, he became hypercritical. He would say and do little petty things to punish Mahovlich over the slightest infraction. The more Imlach pushed, the more Mahovlich withdrew. Mahovlich said Imlach's treatment of him was ridiculous, and that those years were a laborious disaster. And so it begs the question, why didn't they just trade him earlier? In today's NHL, Mahovlich would have been traded 10 times over during 4 seasons. It should be noted, however, that not once did Mahovlich request a trade. When he did get traded, he was shocked. Despite the criticism, Mahovlich still performed at an elite level. Other teams had tried to acquire him, but ownership blocked any deals involving their superstar. Imlach's continuous application of pressure suggests he assumed it would work eventually. The evidence shows that Imlach never gave up on him, until he did. It was later suggested that the worst thing to ever happen to Mahovlich was getting off to a hot scoring start in 1960-61. Perception changed, and so did expectations. Mahovlich couldn't live up to them. Still, one can't help but think that if everybody didn't demand so much from Mahovlich, they might have gotten even more out of him. The first professional hockey player to reach 2,000 career points wasn't Wayne Gretzky. It wasn't Gordie Howe. It was Guyle Fielder, and he did it on the West Coast, outside the NHL spotlight, piling up points in the Western Hockey League long before the league expanded enough to notice players like him. To those who took notice, and they were few in the hockey world, it was a beguiling mystery. How come one of the greatest passers and most creative playmakers in the game wasn't playing in the NHL? There are several contributing factors to this, and many of them were in Fielder's control. For the record, Fielder's NHL record comprises 15 career games with 4 different teams over the course of 8 seasons. In those games, he didn't register a point. One common misconception about the career of Guyle Fielder is that he somehow missed his chance at the big time, that the NHL had somehow overlooked or rejected him. This isn't true. Fielder was already playing senior hockey by age 13. At age 15, he earned his family a $100 bonus for signing a contract with the Chicago Blackhawks. In his last 2 years of juniors, he scored 205 points in 76 games. At age 20, he played 3 games late in the year with the struggling Blackhawks and scored no points. The Blackhawks were the worst team in the league that year by a large margin. Rookie head coach Ebby Goodfellow sent Fielder out only for a few shifts. In his first NHL game, Fielder had to watch from the bench while his team lost 7-0 to the Red Wings. This was a formative experience. Another common misconception is that Fielder's size held him out of the NHL. At 5'9", 165 pounds, one might assume he was too small. But this made him the same size as Dave Keon and Stan Mikita. For the 1951-52 season, the Hawks sent Fielder to the new Westminster Royals of the Pacific Coast League, soon to be renamed Western Hockey League. He scored 76 points in just 57 games and won Rookie of the Year. That summer he was acquired by Detroit, who sent him to the Edmonton Flyers of the Western League under coach Bud Poile. Fielder and Poile didn't see eye to eye. One night, early in his Edmonton tenure, some of Fielder's buddies from his hometown of Nipawin, Saskatchewan visited his hotel room with a case of beer. Fielder's room was right next to Poile's. Poile sent Fielder to the St. Louis Flyers of the American League. There, he scored 83 points in 62 games to capture that league's Rookie of the Year title. He finished 3 points back of Cleveland's Eddie Olson for the league lead. If he'd have started the season in St. Louis, he might have hit it. St. Louis finished near the bottom of the standings, and when the regular season was over, he was sent to play with the Red Wings for their playoff series against Boston. He played 4 games and scored no points. Again, he got into only a couple of shifts per game. In the first game, he had to watch from the bench while the Red Wings won 7-0. The Wings eventually lost the series in a shocking upset. Eventually, he settled in Seattle of the Western League. In the 1957 season, he set a professional hockey record by scoring 122 points. The Red Wings took notice, and Fielder once again found himself suiting up for the team. This time, Fielder thought he'd finally made it. He made arrangements for his wife Beverly to come over and stay with him in Detroit. Coach Jimmy Skinner put him on a line with Gordie Howe. Most unproven players would have given anything to play on a line with Howe, but for Fielder, it was a bad fit. Both men liked to control the puck. Both were play drivers, and therefore didn't complement each other. Instead of having 2 play drivers on 2 different lines, Skinner tried putting them together to predictably fruitless results. Fielder was benched for not producing. He was angry. On a Friday, Fielder went into Red Wings manager Jack Adams' office and told him he wasn't going to sit on the bench. If Detroit wasn't going to play him, could they at least just trade him back to Seattle? That Sunday, he met Beverly at the airport and told her they were going back home. They went back to his motel to watch the Red Wings game on TV, then packed their belongings and drove back across the country to their home in New Westminster. Beverly didn't mind. and the couple treated it as a road trip vacation. When he got back to Seattle, he scored 111 points in just 62 games. Fielder liked to have 2 beers immediately after a game, to replace fluid. Beer's good for that, he'd say. Before a game, when the bus would arrive in a new town, Fielder would find a local pool hall, hustle $50 in pocket money, then hurry back over to the rink. After his 2 post-game beers, he'd go right back out to the pool hall for another 50. When he wasn't on the road, he was an apprentice electrician. Fielder was born in 1930. The Depression made tireless workers of an entire generation. Fielder was no exception. In 1958, the Maple Leafs were rebuilding. It had been ages since their last Stanley Cup back in '51. Too long for the proud Maple Leafs. Punch Imlach picked up Fielder in the off-season draft. Imlach wanted to send Fielder to Rochester for seasoning. Fielder refused to report. Imlach actually flew out to New Westminster to meet with Fielder and try to persuade him to come over. Fielder wouldn't budge. He didn't want to leave his job as an apprentice electrician. He'd prefer to keep his home life stable rather than try to move his family over to the East Coast again for little pay. Imlach flew back to Toronto, shaking his head. Besides, for Fielder, the game was more like an art project than the means to an end. The NHL game represented the brutality, lowest common denominator of the sport. And why uproot his family to take a bit part when he was the leading man where he was? Imlach suspended Fielder. That year he scored 119 points for the Seattle Totems. The suspension held. He was never invited to another NHL tryout. Fielder never looked back. He won 3 President's Cups with the Totems as league champions, 9 WHL leading scorer awards between 1954 and 1967, 6 George Leader Cups as WHL MVP, 3 Fred J. Hume Cups as gentlemanly player. Arguably, his most impressive accomplishment was bagging 1,430 apples over 1,425 games. If he'd finished with that many points, we'd still be talking about him. Fielder's game wasn't built on blazing speed or bludgeoning toughness. It was about awareness, anticipation, and precision. It was no-look passes and puck control for long stretches. He could score goals at will, but he'd prefer to make others do it. He took a real satisfaction in being the guy who made the play happen, the first domino. Fielder felt the future of the game would be built on passing, like the way the Soviets played, not on brutality, which was more aligned to the NHL model. The NHL treated its players like cattle. Team owners were Roman emperors. The players were nothing more than gladiators. In the Western League, star players were treated with dignity and respect and were reasonably well paid. The move over to the NHL would require a significant pay cut. In the NHL, Fielder had been labeled with a bad boy reputation for being a free spirit who liked his booze too much, that he partied a little too hard. The reality was that Fielder never went beyond those 2 post-game beers, and none of his Western League coaches ever had a negative thing to say about him. But in an environment that attempted to break any and all comers, self-respect was seen as a red flag. When he broke Gordie Howe's career record for most points in pro hockey, his then-current team, the Portland Buckaroos, gathered up the puck and framed it in a plaque. That's the one trophy he kept. The rest of them were taking up too much room, so he donated them to a local hockey association. When Fielder finally retired in 1973, the Western League retired with him. Not immediately, but in essence. The league lasted only 1 more year. It was supposed to have merged with the NHL in a deal that fell through. By now, there's teams in Los Angeles, Vancouver, Edmonton, Denver, Seattle, and Salt Lake City. We're still waiting on teams in Portland and San Diego, but that's another story. The death of the WHL ensured that Fielder's career records will never be touched, but expansion itself guarantees it won't happen in any other minor league. It simply could not happen again that a player of Fielder's caliber would spend a 23-year career entirely outside the NHL. There's too much money today, and too many jobs available for it to ever happen again. Former defenseman and coach Hal Laycoe suggested Fielder was born 20 years too early. By the time the NHL finally expanded and began to dismantle the Western League, Fielder was 36 years old, with a whole established life outside of hockey. It's reasonable to assume that had the NHL expanded earlier, specifically to the West Coast, Fielder might have committed to landing a major league job. But there was one overriding factor. He wasn't going to ride the bench. He was going to play, and he was going to play his way. Before we move on, if you enjoy these quiet late-night hockey stories, consider subscribing to Cold Case Hockey for many more to come. And if you'd like to support the channel further, memberships are now live. Thanks for listening, and now, back to the video. After the 1967 expansion draft, the Oakland Seals were expected to be the cream of the crop of the 6 new clubs. But the Seals never found their footing. Playing all year to an empty building, there was daily chatter about the team moving to Vancouver, Canada, by as early as the start of their second season. The Bay Area had been granted an expansion team with the idea that the Seals would play in San Francisco and serve as a tentpole franchise. The NHL had only secured a television deal with NBC on the basis of having 2 West Coast clubs, one of them in glamorous San Francisco, not seedy Oakland. But the Seals struggled to find a suitable facility in San Francisco, and owner Barry Van Gerbig was in over his head. In an 11th-hour, desperate move, he placed the team in Oakland. For a variety of reasons, it was a fatal decision. The on-ice results followed suit. General manager Rudy Pellew resigned before the start of the season. The Seals became the doormats of the NHL. Fans in Oakland weren't interested, and the players hated their coach and GM, Bert Olmsted. Well, everybody except one. Ted Hampson wasn't happy when he found out he'd been traded to Oakland. In fact, he was devastated. He came over from Detroit in a mid-season deal with young defender Bert Marshall and winger John Brenneman for 32-year-old defenseman Kent Douglas. Hampson had been the Red Wings' second-line center, scoring an efficient 27 points in 37 games. The journeyman had been on the AHL-NHL shuttle for much of the decade, playing for multiple organizations. He finally started to stick around in the big league with Detroit during the 1967 season, at age 30. The Red Wings were having a miserable year, but it was nothing compared to what was unfolding in Oakland. The last-place Seals drew crowds of less than 3,000, and even those numbers were dwindling. To make matters worse, Coach Olmsted had the reputation of a demanding taskmaster. For his part, Hampson was known as a fast-skating playmaker and a hard worker. To the bewilderment of his teammates, Olmsted took a shine to Hampson. Hampson continued to be productive, scoring 27 points in 34 games with his new team, and was named an alternate captain. But the results in the standings and the box office showed no improvement. Olmsted resigned before the end of the campaign. Van Gerbig brought in new general manager Frank Selke Jr. and apologized to fans for their performance. He promised dedication and commitment to the community for the upcoming season. A little over a decade earlier, Hampson had led the Flin Flon Bombers to a Memorial Cup title. His NHL rights were held by the Rangers organization. He was placed on waivers before the season for assignment to Providence, but the Maple Leafs chairman of the hockey committee remembered that Hampson had helped the Bombers defeat Sam Pollock's Ottawa Junior Canadiens in the Memorial Cup and claimed him. Yes, things were that petty in the original 6 era. His first week with the Leafs was a major success. He scored 2 goals and 4 points in his first 4 games. Some scribes compared his smooth skating and puck-moving ability to that of Leafs Hall of Famer Joe Primo. But by the end of the season, Hampson had learned firsthand that coach Punch Imlach didn't like to play rookies, and he found himself in a checking role with the Rochester Americans. That summer, he was reclaimed by the Rangers and spent the next 3 years as a utility forward, mostly in New York. In the summer of 1963, he was picked up by Detroit and dispatched to their farm club in Pittsburgh,
where he spent the next 3 seasons. Finally, he broke through with Detroit, scoring 48 points with the big club in 1967. They even protected him in the expansion draft, but Detroit general manager Sid Abel was desperate to upgrade his defense corps, and, as he put it, you have to give up something good. After the 1968 season, Seals captain Bob Bond requested a trade. The organizational instability and lack of fan interest bothered him, so Selke traded him to Detroit with Ron Harris for a package that included left-winger Gary Jarrett. Jarrett provided the Seals with speed and an upgrade on offense. Before the season started, Hampson was tapped as the next team captain. He would be teamed with Jarrett and one-time Rocket Richard heir apparent Bill Hick on the club's top line. The trio became known as the Assembly Line. Early in the season, Van Gerbig sold a controlling share of the club to Seymour Knox. Knox intended to move the team to Buffalo, but the move wasn't approved by the league. Neither the sale nor the relocation attempt was known to NHL President Clarence Campbell or Seals President Bill Torrey until after the fact. Selke later claimed the league wanted to preserve the Buffalo territory so it could collect a $6 million expansion fee. Meanwhile, Van Gerbig still owed the NHL the remainder of the Seals' original expansion fee. On the ice, the Seals never found consistency, but neither did the rest of the All-Expansion West Division. Despite a poor record, the Seals remained in a playoff position for most of the season. They needed everybody's help to win, and Hampson led by example. Hustlin' Ted Hampson set the tone night after night, pacing the club in scoring and in effort. He skated in all situations, including on the penalty kill, prompting Selke to declare Hampson the best all-around center in the West Division. There were few who disagreed. The league also blocked a proposed move across the bay to San Francisco. The Seals played select home games at the Cow Palace, but sometimes drew fewer than 2,000 fans there. The WHL Seals routinely sold out the same venue. With no hope of bringing the NHL club there full-time, there was little incentive for fans to invest in the team. Before the Knox deal was quashed, there had been other proposed sales involving Labatt Breweries and a group called Puck Inc. Each time Van Gerbig attempted to sell the team, the league stepped in and rejected the deal. On the ice, the trouble was getting everyone going at once. When the goaltenders stood on their heads, the assembly line went cold. When the big line cranked out offense, the goaltending fell flat. Pep talks and team-building activities only went so far. In what may have been the club's brightest early moment, the Seals beat the Montreal Canadiens 5-4 in front of 8,100 home fans, but then struggled against weaker teams like Detroit. They would beat Boston 3-1 one night, then lose 8-5 to the Kings the next. Meanwhile, Hampson recorded 2 or more points on 19 separate occasions, including each of the final 5 games as the club geared up for the playoffs. Hampson finished with 75 on the year. Together, the assembly line racked up 181 points. The Seals finished just 7 games under 500, good enough for second place in the division, and the best season in franchise history. Their first-round opponent would be the Kings. The Seals lost every game against the Kings until the final 2 games of the regular season. The series opened in Oakland. The Seals were required to guarantee the league $30,000 in ticket revenue over the first 2 games for the player pool. To meet that demand, and pay rent, they would need to sell roughly 8,500 tickets per game. Even at home, the Kings were almost as poor a draw, and even the Canadiens hadn't sold that many tickets in Oakland. In April of 1969, the Oakland Arena had a seating capacity of 13,502. By puck drop for Game 1, roughly 10,000 tickets remained unsold. The Seals would be playing at a loss, even in the playoffs. That meant the deeper they went, the more money they would lose. Unless, Torrey and Selke reasoned, the team went on an unbelievable tear and captured the imagination of the city. The Seals lost Game 1 in overtime. Hampson was held off the score sheet. Over the next 3 games, he went on a tear of his own, extending another multi-point streak. By the time the series returned to Oakland, it was tied at 2 games apiece. Hampson collected $1,000 in bonuses for winning both the club MVP and leading scorer awards. The official attendance figures for games 1 and 2, 5,449 and 5,232. For comparison, the Montreal-New York series that year drew 32,804 fans over its first 2 games. Those who did turn out in Oakland littered the ice with debris and empty paper cups. Play was stopped several times to clear the surface. Referee Glenn Skov had beer dumped on him between periods. For Game 5, Oakland fans showed signs of life, purchasing 7,757 tickets, a marked improvement. It suggested the market would support a winner. When the final horn sounded, the Seals had won 4-1 and taken a 3-2 series lead. The Kings took Game 6 at home. Hampson was held scoreless over the final 2 games and finished a combined -2. The team was bipolar, looking like a world-class club one night and disinterested the next. Game 7 returned to Oakland Arena. A crowd of 9,384 finally cleared the league's sales threshold. But the Seals couldn't clear the Kings. Nor could Oakland's defense clear the zone, as the heavier Kings' forecheck hemmed them in. The Seals looked inexperienced, hesitant to make decisions. The game ended in a 5-3 Kings victory. Just as it started to look like the Seals might finally make money instead of losing it. That summer, Hampson learned he had won the Masterton Trophy while away on a trip. The league held an awards banquet in those days, and Hampson's absence and ignorance felt quietly appropriate for the city he played in. It remains the only NHL award ever won by a Seal. The following season, the Seals coach put the lines in a blender and had Hampson playing alongside more inexperienced wingers. He found himself concentrating on babysitting, and his numbers reflected it. Just 2 assists in his first 9 games. He eventually found his footing, finishing the season with 52 points. But the club dropped 11 points in the standings, slipping to 4th place. They were swept out of the first round by the Penguins. It would be the franchise's final playoff appearance. Later that year, the club was sold to Charles O. Finley. Finley rebranded the team as the California Golden Seals and had the players wear white skates. Hampson was traded to the North Stars late in the 1971 season. The Seals were in last place, with no hope of climbing out and little left to play for. Still, Hampson was stunned. "I'm not unhappy with where I'm going," he said, "but I'm sad about leaving here. This place gets to you, and this was my team."
In January 1959, Detroit Red Wings Norris Trophy-winning defenseman Red Kelly suffered a broken ankle. It happened during practice and was never disclosed to the public. Kelly missed the next 3 games and wore a plaster cast on his ankle. Detroit lost all 3 without him and plummeted in the standings. The Red Wings hadn't missed the playoffs in 20 years, and pressure quickly mounted. Wings GM Jack Adams asked Kelly to remove the cast and return to the lineup. Kelly agreed. He removed the cast and played with his leg taped from instep to knee, restricting his movement. Detroit won 3 of the next 4 games. Kelly finished the year in the Red Wings lineup despite the injury. According to a later report, Kelly could stand little pressure on his ankle and could put no power into his skating stride, thus limiting his effectiveness. His production declined, and some began to whisper that 31-year-old Kelly was washed. Forwards beat him to loose pucks consistently. Unable to push off with his injured leg, Kelly was ineffective along the boards and was forced to hook and hold his way out of trouble. For a 3-time Lady Byng Trophy recipient, finishing the season with 17 minors was in itself a sign of decline. Publicly, team brass criticized the club and the media. At one point, Coach Sid Abel fined all the veterans $100 for lack of effort, Kelly included. No one outside the organization knew about the injury. The team kept it quiet out of concern that opponents would target the ankle. Kelly finished the season with a disappointing 21 points in 67 games, a significant drop-off from his usual standard. The Red Wings also missed the playoffs. Kelly was criticized for poor play. Some said he'd lost his stuff. When confronted with questions about his performance, Adams threw him under the bus. During an interview for Maclean's magazine the following season, reporter Trent Frayne asked Red Kelly about the club's recent improved performance. Kelly offered platitudes. Frayne pushed. He told Kelly that reports out of Detroit suggested his legs were gone. Kelly pushed back. He revealed the truth about the injury. Frayne published the account, touching off a small, unintended scandal. When questioned about players being asked to play through injuries, Jack Adams denied the severity of Kelly's ailment, pointing to assessments from team doctors that characterized it as a bone bruise. Red Wings management felt that Kelly's comments about the injury had been framed in a way that reflected poorly on the organization. Kelly, for his part, believed the tone of the article had been shaped to sell magazines. Management's interpretation prevailed. Kelly was summoned to Adams' office. Bruce Norris, the president and owner of the Red Wings, was in the room. Adams told Kelly that he had been traded to the New York Rangers and was expected to report to the team the next day. Kelly told him he'd think about it and left the room. By 1960, the Rangers had earned a reputation as an organization that didn't treat its players well or pay them fairly. Kelly may have heard stories from teammate Gordie Howe about his own experiences attending Rangers camp. The club had shown recent signs of life in the standings, but they were currently entrenched at the bottom, and Red Kelly probably wasn't going to be able to dig them out. The trade was supposed to be Kelly and winger Billy McNeil for Eddie Shack and Bill Gadsby. Kelly stayed up all night and thought about it. The next morning, he called Rangers GM Muzz Patrick and told him he was retiring and that he would not report. There was silence on the other end of the line. Kelly explained to Patrick that he had recently married and was starting a family. His wife was pregnant and she wasn't keen to go. Kelly would go into business, look after his bowling alley in Simcoe. He'd already been on the phone with his other employer, for whom he sold power tools during the off-season to fish around for work. Patrick didn't understand. He told Kelly that the trade had already been made, that he was to report immediately. Kelly apologized and told Patrick it was nothing personal against New York, but he didn't like the way things had been handled from Detroit's end, that he thought he deserved a better fate than to be dumped off to a last-place team. Later that day, Billy McNeil also called Patrick to tell him he wasn't going to report either. Patrick hung up the phone. Both Kelly and McNeil were suspended by the Red Wings. Adams said they were finished around Detroit. League President Clarence Campbell stepped in to have a personal word with Kelly. He wouldn't be swayed. Campbell had no choice but to void the trade. League Brain Trust lamented the decision. Muzz Patrick prophesied a dark day when players would begin to dictate where they played. Kelly got home the next day to news that Toronto assistant GM King Clancy had called. He wanted to know if Kelly was interested in joining the Maple Leafs. The Leafs hadn't won a Stanley Cup in nearly a decade. They had a coach known to be hard on his players. But Toronto was closer to home and wouldn't require Kelly's wife to move. And if it kept him playing hockey a little while longer, then sure. Toronto agreed to send bottom-pairing defenseman Mark Rayome to Detroit. Adams was put in a bad spot. He could let Kelly retire and receive nothing, or accept what Toronto was willing to offer. Adams accepted. Campbell approved the deal.
the Brain Trust lamented. Adams was in the press, still smarting, insisting something had to be done to prevent a repeat. Some saw Kelly's move as a loophole. What made it work was that he was genuinely willing to retire. Punch Imlach took Kelly, a declining offensive defenseman, and had him center a line with Frank Mahovlich. The move revived Kelly's career, unlocked Big M, and became a major catalyst for 3 straight Stanley Cups from 62 to 64, then one more for good measure in 67. Imlach is often credited with genius for the move, but it's something that Detroit would do occasionally. Imlach just made the Kelly switch from D to center permanent. Kelly was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1969. Imlach was inducted in 1984.
Pierre Pilote stopped skating at age 12. For 3 years, he was off the ice. His father, Paul Pilote, was a very good amateur welterweight fighter and wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. He even started training him. But Mom didn't approve. When she put her foot down, it was time to try junior hockey. The skates were dusted off, and Pilote quickly established himself as an asset on the back end, despite falling on his behind every time he skated backwards. 10 years later, he was an NHL regular with the struggling Chicago Blackhawks. Before long, he became a big part of the team's turnaround to respectability. He became part of a championship core with Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, and Glenn Hall that broke through in 1961. Pilote was named captain of the team the following season and won the first of 3 consecutive Norris trophies as league's top defenseman the year after that. So why, then, did the Chicago crowd boo him out of town before the end of the decade? Boo, Pierre. Get off the ice. At 5'10", 165 pounds, Pilote was an undersized defenseman, but typically speaking, he played a rugged style of game. He made crisp and decisive passes in all 3 zones. A fearless puck rusher, he was the rudder of an elite offense for the better part of a decade. Boo, Pierre. Hang him up. In 1961, the year the Hawks won the Cup, Pilote picked up 15 points, a playoff record for defensemen. In 1965, he set the regular season record with 59 points. Boo, Pierre. Why don't you join the Ice Follies? The criticism was twofold. First, at 36 years old, Pilote had visibly lost a step. This led directly to the second, that he didn't play physical enough. He had the tools, he had the history, but fans no longer saw the desire. This wasn't necessarily a fan-fueled conspiracy theory either. Pilote all but admitted as much in a Hockey News article in 1987. The first game I ever played against John Ferguson, he came skating at me with his head down, Pilote said. I could have really lined him up and hit him, but I passed, figuring it would be to my advantage. I figured that had I hit him, he would have been after me for the next 10 years of my life. When he first came on with the Hawks, he was paired with Moose Vasco on defense. Vasco would cover for Pilote while he pinched up in the play. In the neutral zone, around the Hawks' blue line, Pilote would sometimes use Vasco's large frame as a screen, then come around into the open area of the ice and flatten the puck carrier if he didn't have his head up. Midway through the 1967-68 season, Pilote had been voted to his 8th All-Star game. When he returned to Chicago, he'd hear the boos when the puck jumped over his stick at the blue line. He'd hear them when he was anywhere near the play on a goal against. He'd even hear them when his name would be announced on a scoring play. Pilote put on a brave public face. "It doesn't bother me," he said. "I've never been much to look at, so I guess I haven't got much of a following among the women. And I guess the guys don't like the way I play the game. It's my style, though, and I can't do it any other way." He consoled himself with the thought that it was only a temporary thing, that soon his defenders would drown out the boo birds. His teammates were quick to defend him. Kenny Warham said, "Pierre makes many more good plays, great plays actually, than he does poor ones. Fans just don't seem to be able to notice them, though." The truth was that Pilote was only the most recent recipient of the abuse. Dennis Hull and Eric Nestrenko had also received the boo bird treatment in recent years for perceived deficiencies, but no one had fallen further from grace than Pilote. As time went on, the wound to Pilote's fan reception didn't heal. It festered. The boos got louder. The pressure built heavier and heavier. Then, the mid-game benching started. Soon, he dreaded even getting a pass. Instead of activating with the puck, he looked to pass it away immediately, forcing plays, running into trouble, reinforcing perception. It all came to a head one night in early February of 1968. The Hawks were hosting the Kings. 3 minutes into the first, Gilles Maroc gathered the loose puck in the Chicago zone and sent it to Pilote heading north. Pilote found a streaking Pit Martin through layers of forum blue sweaters, tape to tape. Martin beat Terry Sawchuk from 10 feet out. When the goal was announced, Martin and Maroc were cheered. Pilote's name received boos and hisses. A second assist on a Bobby Hull goal in the third couldn't erase the two mistakes Pilote had made that ended up in the back of the home team's net. At one point in the third, Pilote let the Madhouse crowd know that their constant booing was starting to get to him. He made a gesture towards the crowd with his stick. It didn't matter that the game was the team's fourth in 5 nights, or that the team charter out of Philadelphia had to turn around mid-flight because of a bum engine, or that the plane almost crash-landed at O'Hare at 3 that very morning. Either way, one thing was clear. The relationship had become irreparable. When the Hawks dealt him to the Leafs that spring, he wasn't told until a Toronto reporter called to ask him about it. "This is quite a shock," Pierre said. "I have to admit I could feel it coming this past season." When the Hawks finally had their PR man called to tell him, Pilote hung up the phone on him. Leafs coach and GM Punch Imlach jumped at the chance to acquire the aging Pilote. Punch said, "Anytime I can get my hands on an all-star, I'm happy." Imlach was a notorious mark for veteran players. "Pilote is not old," Imlach exclaimed. "He's only 36, 2 years younger than Tim Horton, our best defenseman. I've said before I'm not interested in age or salary, just ability." Imlach planned to keep Pilote around for at least 3 years. Pilote spent the summer thinking about what else he could do for work. Nobody from the Leafs tried to contact Pilote until a letter from Imlach arrived in August inviting him to training camp. Over at Hawks camp, Coach Billy Ray couldn't pick a new captain to replace Pilote. The Hawks went without one that season. When the exhibition schedule got underway, some of Pilote's new teammates gave him a hard time. On one sequence, he passed the puck to Mike Walton and slipped into the open area ahead for a give and go. Walton passed the puck behind him. The other team picked it up and went the other way for a goal against. Later, Pilote dished the puck to Walton again, then held back. Walton sent the puck to where Pilote would have been on a give and go. Pilote got the impression that the lack of chemistry was deliberate. "Oh boy," he thought, "the old animosities are coming back to haunt me." Though he was criticized in Chicago for diminished physical play, the Toronto locker room hadn't seen it that way. He had a down year as a Leaf, but took some satisfaction that his new team had made the playoffs, while the Hawks didn't. After their Cup victory, the Hawks had remained perennial contenders for the remainder of the original 6 era, picking up their first ever first-place finish in 1967. When the Hawks lost in the first round again that year, Pilote took it to heart. He said, "It's getting worse as I get older. 5 or 6 years ago, I'd play my game, figured I'd done my best. I could let it go at that. But the last couple of years, more and more, it's been getting to me. I carry the whole load on my shoulders, worry about everything. Both teams were a little tired, but I think if we could have just hit them and got going, we could have had it. We didn't play that badly, but we just couldn't come up with that something extra." In the summer of 1967, the Hawks dealt underperforming center Phil Esposito to the Boston Bruins. The massive multiplayer deal was meant to revitalize the team, but made the Bruins into instant contenders instead. In the 4th game of the season, the Bruins trounced the Hawks 7-1. The 3 forwards the Hawks had let go were in the Bruins' top 6. The booing began that night. The Hawks sank in the standings, starting the year with 6 straight losses. The players were mad. The fans were mad. Fans in Chicago needed a focus for their frustrations. The Hawks still boasted a top-notch offense, but had lost a little too much depth. Glenn Hall had been lost to expansion. He'd always been there to cover for defensive lapses. It's Hall's all-world backstopping that had allowed Pilote to rush the puck deep into the offensive zone. Pilote's innovative style broke offensive records, but often left Hall to fend off breakaways and odd-man rushes. Hall said he was better offensively than he was defensively. When Pierre rushed the puck was when he was playing his game. With Hall gone, whatever faults he had were magnified. 40 years later, in a pre-game ceremony in 2008, Pilote and Keith Magnuson had their number 3 retired by the Blackhawks. Nobody booed that night. In 1970, 2 expansion teams entered the NHL. Both were handed a franchise player. One would become the face of a team for nearly 2 decades. The other would spend his career trying to figure out where he belonged. The difference between them came down to the spin of a wheel. At least, that's the official version. In 1970, the NHL held its second expansion when it welcomed new teams in Vancouver and Buffalo. For the second straight season, NHL powerhouses Montreal and Boston held the top picks of the league's 4 worst teams thanks to shrewd trading. The top 2 picks in the amateur draft were reserved for the newcomers, but thanks to Montreal and Boston, they came with a stipulation. The NHL's Board of Governors put rules in place to ensure that the expansion clubs couldn't trade their first picks, and the players chosen had to remain with the club for at least 3 seasons. A spinning wheel was used to determine who would pick first. Vancouver had numbers 2 to 6, Buffalo had 8 to 12. 7 would result in a respin. When the wheel landed on number 11, NHL President Clarence Campbell thought it landed on 1 and announced that Vancouver had the pick. Cheers erupted from the Canucks table, fist pumps and high fives all around. But there was no number 1. Buffalo's head coach and GM Punch Imlach piped up and corrected Campbell, who was embarrassed by the mistake. What makes this scenario odd, or even suspicious, are the coincidences involving numbers. Some of them are small, some of them were really large for the time, but we'll get back to this. The top 2 prospects of the draft were blue chippers, considered franchise cornerstones. Center Gilbert Perreault of the Montreal Junior Canadiens had scored at a torrid pace in the OHA and led the club to back-to-back Memorial Cup titles. He had NHL-ready size, and his speed and creativity made him a superstar in the making. The other was Dale Talon of the Toronto Marlies. Listed as a defenseman, he scored 39 goals and 79 points in 54 games, playing every position but goaltender. Talon was the first blue-chip defender slapped with the label of the next Bobby Orr, and he wouldn't be the last. In that era, just about any young defender who could move the puck was given the label. Once the pick was in, Imlach chose Perreault. People wondered how Perreault would work with Imlach, who had a reputation of not coddling star players and favoring veterans. Imlach took Perreault aside and told him not to worry about playing defense, just focus on scoring. He quickly signed the junior star to a 3-year, $75,000 deal. As a junior, the Montreal crowds would chant, "We want Perreault." When asked if he would consider trading the young center to the Habs, Imlach mused, "All Sam Pollock's got to do is give me Jean Beliveau, Jacques Lemaire, Henri Richard, Jacques Laperriere, J.C. Tremblay, and a few more of them." Imlach predicted that the Sabres would make the playoffs in their first year, passing Vancouver and Toronto. He also said the Sabres would be the first expansion team to win the Stanley Cup. After he was fired by the Maple Leafs following the 1969 season, he never missed a chance to shade his former team. When Imlach chose the color scheme for the Sabres unis, he reasoned that the Leafs were blue and white, but the Sabres would be blue and gold, because they would be classier. In Vancouver, Talon was becoming the Canucks' Mr. Everything. But Talon just wanted to be something specific. That first season was his most productive on the West Coast. He scored 14 goals and 56 points, breaking Bobby Orr's record for rookie defenseman, though that was a bit of a misnomer. Once again, the organization shuffled him around the lineup, trying him at every position but goaltender. Being an expansion club, the Canucks were thin down the middle. The organization hoped that Talon would develop into the 6'1", 195-pound center they really wanted. It begs the question why they didn't just take Daryl Sittler with the pick. Talon was unhappy. When asked, Talon would say, "I'm not playing my position." Perreault played his natural position with a flair and grace patterned after Jean Beliveau. Imlach had coached Beliveau with the Quebec Aces and claimed that Perreault was the better player. Perreault set league records, breaking Newsy Lalonde's rookie goals record that had stood since 1925. His 72 points shattered the old mark, and he did it with Eddie Shack and Ron Anderson as his wings. That same season, Phil Esposito set new standards with 76 goals and 152 points. He said if anyone was going to break those records, it would be Perreault. Perreault won the Calder Trophy. He joined Team Canada for the 1972 Summit Series, but flew home from Moscow to attend Sabres training camp after it was revealed he wouldn't play with the team. By year 3, Imlach had quit the bench due to health reasons, but the Sabres finally lived up to his promise by making the playoffs. Perreault hit another level with 88 points, centering the French connection line with Rick Martin and René Robert. The trio made deft passes, sharing a seemingly telepathic ability to find each other through traffic. Watching Perreault, his effortless ability to skate through entire teams and deke out netminders, one had to wonder how he didn't score 10 times a game. Perreault had outscored every NHL player who came before him after 3 seasons. In 1973, he won the Lady Byng Trophy with 10 penalty minutes. He finished 5th place in Hart Trophy voting. The sky was the limit. After 3 years in Vancouver, Talon's confidence was shattered. He never knew where he'd be slotted into the lineup, sometimes not until just before puck drop. The team was a disaster on the ice and off the ice. They'd managed just 66 wins and were hit harder than most by WHA roster poaching. Tom Scallon, the club's owner, was convicted of securities fraud in April of 1973. Talon had seen his point totals plummet from 56 to 44 to 37 in increasingly confusing deployment. The good news for Talon was the 3-year prospect trade embargo had been lifted. Talon was determined to never play for the Canucks again. If the team didn't trade him, he would sign with the WHA. Canucks management relented and traded Talon to the Chicago Blackhawks for goaltender Gary Smith and defenseman Jerry King Kong Korab. The Hawks introduced their new star defender to the Chicago media with a press conference where they handed him a jersey with the number 9 on it. Talon was confused. That was Bobby Hull's number. This was the Blackhawks' way of sticking it to Hull for bolting for the WHA and more money. After a couple of preseason games and a steady shower of boos every time he touched the puck, Talon demanded they give him a new number. They gave him 19. In his 3rd season with the Hawks, and his first fully healthy one, Talon set new franchise record for points by a defenseman with 62. He'd never hit 30 again, and retired 4 years later. Perreault retired after the 1986 season. He changed his mind and returned for the 1986-87 season, but changed his mind again after only 20 games. He scored 9 goals and 16 points in those 20 games, but his passion was gone. He thought he'd lost his legs and was no longer able to work the same magic he once had. Over 17 seasons, he amassed over 500 goals and 1,300 points, all with the Sabres. He became a first-ballot Hall of Famer in 1990, but one thing eluded him. When Sabres owner Seymour Knox passed away in 1996, he did so having never seen his team win the Stanley Cup. Perreault represented his team's best hope in those years, but even Scotty Bowman and a renewed dedication to defense couldn't change their fortunes. Knox had originally bought the Oakland Seals back in 1969 with the intention of moving them to Buffalo. The NHL wouldn't allow it. The Seals' original owner, Barry Van Gerbig, still hadn't paid the league the full amount of the $2 million expansion fee. By 1970, just 3 years after Oakland's entry, the expansion fee had gone up to $6 million, and the league wanted Knox to pay it. Here's where the whispers begin. Some argued that the league knew that it was screwing Knox for more money, and therefore owed him a favor. Enter Clarence Campbell's spinning wheel. Imlach is the one who chose high numbers for Buffalo. He said it was because 11 was his favorite number. 11 also just happened to be Perreault's jersey number in the juniors. The wheel landed on number 11, giving the Sabres the chance to draft first overall and select Pierre, setting up the team for success. Pierre later claimed that he chose jersey number 11 in Buffalo because of the spinning wheel. Then what made him choose number 11 in juniors? The official version says that the pick was chosen on a whim, the spin of a wheel, but it's entirely possible that the official version is a smokescreen, that corruption and backroom dealing decided the fate of two franchises from the beginning, and has cursed each one of them ever since. In a game in early December, Penguins hard-driving rookie Greg Polis slammed Maple Leafs forward Guy Mouse Trottier into the fence, separating his shoulder. Trottier was taken to Wellesley Hospital and wouldn't return for weeks. Leafs brass wasted no time. Down in Tulsa, Leafs prospects Rene Robert and Dennis Dupierre were on a scoring tear, but the Leafs wanted to insert a little sandpaper into the lineup. They were tired of being pushed around and needed a difference maker. Brian Spencer wasn't a big scorer, but he had intangibles. His on-ice exuberance had earned him the nickname Spinner. He was a maximum effort player. A spinner shift might result in a goal, a fight, or a change of momentum, but he would make something happen, and he wouldn't be pushed around. He's a good guy to have around because he doesn't back down from anybody and he likes to hit, Leafs coach Johnny McClellan said. On his way out, Spencer told Oilers PR man Max Fisher, "I'm not so much excited about going to Toronto, but at least my folks can see me play on television." His father Roy had been dealing with some health issues, particularly asthma, and Brian told McClellan that seeing him on TV would give him a real lift. When he left Oklahoma, he took only a shaving kit and a top coat with him. His first game with the big club was memorable for all the wrong reasons. It was a Leafs-Habs rivalry game, and a wild one. Various infractions, including a bench-clearing brawl, resulted in $3,100 worth of player fines. It doesn't sound like much until you find out that each fine was worth only $50 to $100. At one point, Spencer got into a bout with Habs defenseman Terry Harper. Sticks came up. Harper hit Spencer across the back with his stick. Spencer turned around and pummeled Harper. Spencer was assessed both high-sticking and fighting majors. Toronto ended up winning the game 4-0. Back in Tulsa the next day, Spencer's wife gave birth to a girl, whom they named Andrea. Back home in Fort St. James, BC, Spencer had called his father Roy and told him to watch the Leafs game on Hockey Night in Canada. Brian was going to be interviewed between periods that night. Roy was beaming. He sent a telegram to his son before the game. He had installed a large antenna to pick up the CBC from Prince George. He even invited a bunch of his buddies over to watch the game. There would be enough beer for everyone. But when the broadcast started, the CBC was airing a game featuring the new expansion team in Vancouver throughout the province. Embarrassed and outraged, Roy tried calling CKPG, the Prince George station that broadcasted the CBC, and complained about the telecast, demanding they show the Toronto game instead. He became irate, name-calling the person on the other end, and threatened to come down to the station later. The station refused, of course, and this is where most stories end. But this story didn't end there. Roy Spencer loaded up his 9mm Magnum pistol, got into his pickup truck, and drove 85 miles to CKPG.
When he got there, he waited an indeterminate amount of time before spotting newsman Tom Hertel heading toward the entrance. Roy Spencer approached him and told him he'd called earlier for the station to change the hockey broadcast, and they'd done nothing about it. "I don't like the CBC's hockey games," Spencer said. "Why don't you broadcast more Toronto games?" Hertel told Spencer that he had nothing to do with the hockey broadcast, then turned to enter the building. At first, Hertel tried to block the doorway and lock it behind him. That's when he felt the gun barrel press against his back. He had the hammer pulled back, Hertel said. It was cocked and he was going to use it. Inside the building lobby, they encountered receptionist Carol Russell speaking on the phone. "Put the phone down," Hertel said. "This man has a gun." Spencer pushed past Hertel and ripped the receiver out of Russell's hand. Then he pulled the cord from the wall. That's when Hertel ran 10 yards down the hall to the radio newsroom. "A guy down there has a gun," he said. "Call the police." Outside of British Columbia, the rest of Canada was treated to the Leafs' 2-1 win over Chicago. Between the second and third periods, Brian Spencer was all smiles as he spoke with host Ward Cornell. Spencer mentioned Fort St. James and his goal of sticking with the Leafs and maybe even chipping in with 15 goals. Cornell asked Spencer if the Leafs had asked him to do a little thumping after his emergency call-up. "Not really," Spencer said, "but it always turns out that way." Roy Spencer held 3 men at gunpoint, demanding they change the feed to the Toronto game. One of those men was Russell's fiancée, Stu Fawcett. At first, Spencer's nerves were steady. Obviously, he didn't seem stable, but he seemed basically under control. When program director Don Prentice was summoned, Fawcett told him, "This gentleman has a problem that he'd like to discuss with us." Spencer repeated his demand. "I am very disturbed about the CBC," he told Prentice. "There is going to be a revolution all over this country because of the CBC." The hostages tried to explain to Spencer how network affiliate broadcasts work. Spencer was told that they only get one feed, and that feed was the Canucks game. There was no alternative. At this point, Spencer aimed the gun at the floor. Prentice said that Spencer was stone sober but shaking like a leaf. One observer said his speech was jerky. Spencer lined up 8 staff members against the wall and told them, "I don't want to kill anybody. I have killed before. I killed many times in the commandos. Turn the TV off." Prentice shouted for the operator to do as he said. All around the Prince George area, TV screens went dark at 7:48 p.m. "If I can't watch it," Spencer said, "then nobody should watch hockey." But Spencer was skeptical. The monitors remained on. Prentice tried to hurriedly explain that the rest of the city had no live feed, that these were just the in-house monitors. Spencer told them, "If the station comes back on the air again, I will hold you responsible. I'm very upset about the CBC coverage." When he finally became convinced that the station was off the air, Spencer ran for the front door. The rest of the staff ran out the back door, where they were greeted by members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. 3 RCMP constables had entered the building, hoping to talk Spencer into surrendering. Prentice motioned to them that Spencer had gone out the front door. When they got there, they found him standing on the sidewalk. The police hollered for him to surrender and put down his gun. Spencer opened fire. He hit one constable's holster as he was trying to draw his weapon. He hit another constable in the foot. When the police returned fire, Spencer was hit twice in the left side of the chest and once in the face. He fell to the ground. When he was placed in the ambulance, he was still breathing. By the time the ambulance reached Prince George Regional Hospital, however, he was gone. By 7:54, the station was back on the air. Brian Spencer was told what happened the next morning. The Leafs played again that very night, against the new expansion club in Buffalo. Spencer was in the lineup. Leafs GM Jim Gregory approached him when he heard the news and asked him if he wanted to catch the first plane home. Spencer refused. He said, "My father wanted me to be a hockey player more than he'd wanted anything in the world. I think he would want me to play, and that's what I'm going to do." It was the Leafs' first ever visit to Buffalo. The Sabres were led by former Maple Leafs coach and manager Punch Imlach. The Leafs had fired Imlach in 1969 and struggled ever since. The team had not won more than 2 consecutive games since his departure. It's estimated that at least a quarter of the audience in Buffalo were Leafs fans. They chanted, "Go Leafs, go," and "We want Punch." Spencer fought Sabres defender Tracy Pratt and picked up a pair of helpers in the Leafs' second 4-0 victory in 3 games. Brian Spencer was named the game's 3rd star. During the eulogy at his father's funeral, Brian Spencer read the telegram Roy had sent him before the Hockey Night in Canada game. It said, "Give them hell, son. We are mighty proud."
Look up at the retired numbers hanging from the rafters of Rogers Place in Edmonton. One is not like the others. You have all-time legends, Gretzky, Curry, Messier, Coffey, and then, number 3, Al Hamilton. Today we're going to answer the question, just who is this guy anyway? The 1966 Memorial Cup was a showdown of the top 2 defensive prospects in the game. Bobby Orr represented the East, playing for the Oshawa Generals of the OHA. Al Hamilton was from the West, of the Edmonton Oil Kings. The 2 star defenders electrified the Maple Leaf Garden crowd, trading end-to-end rushes. Hamilton and the Oil Kings dominated the series, winning in 6. Bill Hunter was the GM for Edmonton. 6 years later, Hunter was organizing the WHA, a new professional league to rival the NHL. Hamilton was the top defenseman on the second-year Buffalo Sabres. He finished 4th in team scoring and wore the A on his sweater as alternate captain. He knew Hunter would come calling. He was just worried about what would happen if he did. It had been an uphill battle to crack the Rangers lineup and stay with the big team. Brad Park usurped his role as young puck mover, and he was left exposed in the expansion draft. Sabres GM Punch Imlach made sure Hamilton was the second defenseman off the board, and the first for Buffalo. In year 1, he was their number 1 on the ice. After the season, Hamilton looked for a raise. His relationship with Imlach curdled. Imlach kept Hamilton off the power play all the next season, but he still finished 4th in team scoring. When Hunter called, he offered Hamilton $80,000 a year for 5 years, plus a $5,000 raise annually. The offer was significantly more than what he made in Buffalo. Hamilton didn't want to leave Buffalo, but Hunter kept calling, kept pestering, and kept dangling a payday in front of him. Hunter told him that Edmonton was going to be the greatest hockey city in Canada. Hamilton was skeptical, but he was sold on the money, which was guaranteed for 2 years, even if the WHA never played a single game. Hamilton met with Seymour and Northey Knox and told them the situation. He didn't want to leave. He enjoyed his time in Buffalo. But you only play so many years, and you need to build as big a nest egg as you can. The ball was in Imlach's court to match or exceed the offer. He offered a $2,000 raise. When asked about Hamilton leaving, Imlach muttered something about how he probably wasn't going to make the team next year anyhow. Imlach called in the retired Tim Horton to replace him. For more on that story, see our previous video. During his first year with the Oilers, Hamilton was named captain. After the first game against the LA Sharks, Hamilton thought he'd made a horrible mistake. He says the game had 100 brawls and went on to 2 a.m. But as the year went on, Hamilton and the league found its footing. He finished second in team scoring with 61 points, but struggled a bit with consistency. At times he looked like the best puck-carrying defender in the WHA circuit. At others, Hunter called him a reclamation project. The Oilers' defensive core was strong, probably better than some NHL expansion teams, and Hamilton was the clear leader of the back end. He and Barry Long were the only big men of the group. His job was to punish opposition forwards in front of the net, separate them from the puck, then move it back up ice. In year 2, he hit 59 points and was voted to the WHA All-Star team. Oilers coach Brian Shaw called him the best captain you ever saw. He even works at keeping the coach's morale up.
But because he was the best, much was expected of him. The Northlands Coliseum faithful would get on him for a mistake. In 1974, they would find out just how much they would miss him when he was gone. One night, late in the year, while making one of his trademark end-to-end rushes, Hamilton crashed into the goalpost. His knee was shattered. Surgeons had to remove about half of his kneecap. He missed the rest of the 1974-75 season. Some doubted he could come back from such an injury. Edmonton observers took note. The Oilers went from having one of the best defense cores to one of the worst practically overnight. Nearly recovered and getting ready to rejoin the team for the playoffs, Hamilton tripped going down the stairs at the family home and re-broke his knee. It happened to be on April Fool's Day, but the injury was no joke. Initial reports indicated the injury was career-threatening. Hamilton himself believed them. He wasn't yet 30 years old and his career was likely over. He was despondent. But a visit and a chat with team doctor John Harvey and an optimistic evaluation of the x-rays lifted his spirits. He missed the first 20 games of the 75-76 season. The Oilers were still weak defensively. Management pushed him to return, but his mobility wasn't there. The fans got on him for rushing back before he was ready. Before long, opponents realized he couldn't turn while defending, and Hamilton was left on an island in the defensive zone. It was humiliating. He finished the year with 34 points in 54 games, but a -8. After that year, Hamilton was stripped of the captaincy. The next season, he found himself in head coach Bep Guedolin's doghouse. The next season, Hamilton's knee felt strong again, and he had a bounce back, a career year. He was nearly a point per game through 3/4 of the season when he suffered yet another horrendous injury. Houston's John Gray sent a rising 35-foot slapper straight into Hamilton's eye. They told him he'd be in hospital for 2 or 3 days, but weeks went by before his vision returned. He said it was like there was a film over his eye. He couldn't read, couldn't watch TV. He just laid there, feeling helpless. Before long, the Oilers' season ended without him. He was voted almost unanimously as a first-team All-Star, but that provided little comfort. The following season would be the last of the WHA. The Oilers were scheduled to merge with the NHL at the end of the campaign. The whispers started early. He's too slow. He's not an NHL-caliber defenseman. With the eye injury and the threat of permanent blinding still fresh in his mind, Hamilton played tentatively. His passes were off target, and he couldn't fully commit to blocking a shot. He'd still do it, but he would be self-conscious of his head placement. Hockey is an instinctive, reactionary game, and Hamilton knew he wasn't playing the right way. The '79 Oilers were a dominant team, but lost to the Winnipeg Jets in the Avco Cup final. When it was all said and done, despite the horrific injuries, Hamilton ended up the WHA Oilers' all-time leader in games played, assists, and points. But thanks to declining play, there was no guarantee that Hamilton would join the team when it made its NHL debut the following season. In the summer of 1979, he trained harder than he ever had before, pushing himself into the best shape of his life at age 33. The physical and psychological damage from the eye injury was gone. He felt like he had a few more good years in him. But he had a slow training camp. He watched the Oilers lose their first NHL game against Chicago from home. When he got into the lineup, he scored 8 points in 9 games. In early November, he stepped on Islanders defenseman Stefan Pearson's stick racing for a loose puck in the offensive zone and slammed heavily into the boards. The impact separated his shoulder. He had surgery immediately. A pin was placed in his shoulder to hold it together, and he missed 9 weeks. During his time off, he trained like a madman, desperately trying to get back into the lineup. He became a daily fixture at the Oilers' training facility. Within a few weeks, however, the shoulder had already begun to atrophy. He could barely lift 2 pounds. Gradually, his regimen intensified until he was cleared to return to the lineup in mid-January. He played a handful of games, then was sent to the press box. After that, he was sent down to Houston of the Central League, where he played another 4 games during the NHL All-Star break. When he was recalled, he was sent straight back to the press box. In March, he returned to the lineup and stayed in it until the end of the year. He picked up 10 points in his first 9 games back. But as the season winded down, he was held off the score sheet and only dressed for one of the Oilers' 3 playoff games against the Flyers. It had been a season of ups and downs. His return to the NHL resulted in 19 points in 31 games, but injuries had finally caught up to him. He retired that summer. His number 3 was retired at the Oilers' 1980 home opener in front of the largest crowd to ever witness a hockey game in Canada at the time. Those who weren't there don't understand. Hamilton was the anchor of not only the defense, but the entire Oilers franchise during a nearly decade-long period of instability. For a team looking for an identity, that's everything.
The official story of how Tim Horton died was simple: a late-night car crash. But the crash report and autopsy told a very different story, one involving alcohol, excessive speeds, stimulants, sedatives, and a 4 a.m. drive that should never have happened. For more than 30 years, those details were kept out of public view. Long before the truth finally surfaced, Horton's wrecked car had become a spectacle. Fingers poked through the chain-linked fence, mouths agape, widened eyes scanning the wreckage at the tow yard. They were supposed to be in school, but they had skipped class on a rumor that the broken husk of shattered glass and twisted metal behind the fence was once the car of hockey legend Tim Horton. After the police advised employees at the Simpsons towing yard in St. Catharines to cover the wreckage with a tarp, the crowds finally dispersed. They'd come to gawk. Some people had hoped they could get close enough to snag a macabre souvenir, while others wanted to linger in what precious little remained of the hockey star's presence. The reason for the crowds was because for 20 seasons, Tim Horton patrolled the blue line of the Toronto Maple Leafs, putting together an undeniable Hall of Fame resume, which included 4 Stanley Cups and 6 All-Star teams. His physical strength was legendary. Gordie Howe called him the strongest man in hockey. Every now and then, some young, hotshot rookie would get cheeky with Horton, slash his stick while fighting for a loose puck in the corner, and he would wrap them up in his patented rib-cracking Horton bear hug. The slashing would stop after that. Off the ice, he was mild-mannered and wore thick glasses because of poor eyesight. The combination of strength and poor eyesight prompted Leafs goalie Johnny Bower to nickname him Superman. But after the club fired their longtime coach and GM Punch Imlach, they decided to retool and let the aging star go. Even then, at the age of 40, he was still one of the best rear guards in the game, evidenced by his selection as a second-team All-Star just a year earlier. It was his 3rd consecutive All-Star team appearance. Regardless, the Leafs traded him to the New York Rangers for Dennis Dupierre, not exactly a super return. He toiled there for a season and a half. At the end of the 71 season, he retired. Horton was still virile, still the strongest man in hockey, and already a successful businessman. He grew up during the Great Depression, and so, as did many of his generation, had an appreciation for the kinds of comforts and security money brings. This made him a relentless hard worker and a calculated risk-taker, traits that would help him both on the ice and off the ice when it came to business. For a while, he sold cars. One of the men he sold a car to was Ron Joyce, owner of the U-Donut shop on Ottawa Street in Hamilton, near where Horton lived. After a brief discussion and a business proposal, the friendly and mild-mannered Horton agreed to sponsor the donut shop with his name and image, and U-Donut was rebranded as Tim Horton Donuts. This was in 1964. The shop, specifically with the rebranding, took off. This may have been extremely fortuitous timing, as Horton would have been at the peak of his popularity in the Toronto area. In 1964, Horton set an NHL record for playoff points by a defenseman with 15, while leading the Maple Leafs to their 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup victory. By 71, there were nearly a dozen Tim Horton donut shops around the Hamilton area, and the business was growing rapidly. Retirement wouldn't be a calm, idle rest for Horton. There was too much to do. However, by the end of the 1970-71 NHL campaign, the Pittsburgh Penguins were as flightless as their namesake. They had only made the playoffs once in their first 4 years, and after the shocking death of their young, up-and-coming star center Michel Briere, lacked a strong identity. Penn's head coach Red Kelly was a teammate of Horton's with the Maple Leafs and pleaded with him to come out of retirement to help the faltering Penguins. When Kelly offered him $37,000 to play, which was a third more than he'd made in Toronto, Horton agreed. By the end of the season, though, Horton, who had been known for his strength and resilience, suffered a broken ankle and a separated shoulder, which limited him to 44 games. But Horton's presence with the team gave them a feeling of stability and the added jolt of confidence needed to make the playoffs. Though they were unceremoniously swept by powerhouse Chicago, the Penguins became a playoff fixture through the rest of the decade, solidifying the franchise and legitimizing the team. It would take 20 years, but the Penguins would eventually get their revenge on Chicago. Horton, bruised and battered, would retire once again. However, Imlach, who was then coach and GM of the newly formed Buffalo Sabres, needed a mentor for his young, inexperienced team. Imlach needed a stabilizing force and a father figure for his young team, and he knew exactly where to find one. This time, Horton did not agree. He had enough going on with his business and family life that it was time to walk away from the game. Then, Imlach offered Horton a $100,000 contract, which for the time was an enormous sum for an NHL defenseman. Horton, ever the Depression-era child, couldn't say no to a deal like that, and came out of retirement once again. And once again, Horton helped turn the franchise around. The Sabres were strong in scoring with the famous French Connection line, checking, led by Craig Ramsay and Don Luce, another former Horton teammate with the Rangers, and got good goaltending. But they were a little weak on the back end. At age 43, Horton was no longer the 30-point producer he once was, but he gave them exactly what they needed. His very presence helped mold the careers of young defenders Jim Schoenfeld and Mike Robitaille in particular into reliable rearguards. By year's end, Horton once again found himself a major part of a playoff team. The Sabres put in a scrappy effort against the eventual Cup champs Montreal, taking them to 6 games. But once again, when it was all said and done, Horton retired. And that's where the story should have ended. Horton retiring from pro hockey to focus on family and business. But that's not how the story ended. Imlach, fueled by the taste of success and the promise of greater success to come, wanted one more year from the 23-year NHL veteran. When Horton turned down the offer of another year at $100K, Imlach upped the ante, offering $150,000 for the year. It was an undeniably sweet offer, but he still refused. Then, Horton, still the car dealer at heart, threw out a wild suggestion, one that he didn't think would actually work. He'd sign the deal if Imlach threw in a brand new car, and not just any car, but his dream car, a De Tomaso Pantera, a sporty Italian-built coupe with a Ford V8 engine. To Horton's surprise, Imlach and the Sabres owners agreed. The 1973-74 season didn't go as well as the previous one. After a solid 7-3 start, they began to flounder. The Sabres suffered through winless streaks of 5 or 6 games 3 separate times and found themselves bobbing around 500 by mid-February. On the morning of February 20th, the Sabres were in 5th place in the East Division, and they were going to visit the team they looked up at in the standings, the Toronto Maple Leafs. It was one of those geographical oddity kind of games, a road trip to Toronto in the middle of a 5-game homestand for Buffalo. The Sabres players chartered the team bus for the quick 100-mile trip. If all went well, everyone could be home and in their own beds by just after midnight. But Horton decided not to take the bus, but took the Pantera instead, so he could spend a little extra time with his family and talk business after the game with Joyce. At the morning skate, a puck hit Horton in the jaw, causing him tremendous pain. During the game in Toronto, Horton played through the pain, but was unable to take a regular shift by the third period. His play was inspiring enough for him to be voted third star of the game, despite being held pointless in a 4-2 loss. After the game, Horton took a walk with Imlach while the other players boarded the bus. Horton told him he felt like he'd let the team down. The Sabres had clawed their way back to within one goal after stumbling out of the gate and giving away a 3-0 lead. But with Horton out of the regular action, the team faded late and couldn't sustain their comeback bid. His pride hurt. Horton drove to the Tim Horton Donuts office in Oakville to meet with Joyce. Horton sat in the dark, his coat and driver's gloves on, his feet on the table, an ice pack wrapped around his jaw, and a vodka and soda in his hand. At around 3 a.m., he called his wife Lori to tell her he was going home. He also called his brother, who recognized that he'd been drinking, and urged him to sleep it off in the office. Tim didn't heed his brother's advice. If he had, it would have saved his life. According to Joyce, before he left the office, Horton grabbed a handful of painkillers and downed them. However, no painkillers were found in his system as per the autopsy. Traces of Dexamyl, a sedative, was found in his system along with several yellow and purple pills found at the crash site. These yellow and purple pills were Dexamyl and Dexedrine, an amphetamine popular with the jet set at the time. A bottle of vodka was also found among the wreckage. It seemed Horton would drink to excess, then take a stimulant to stay alert, then a sedative to balance the stimulant. It's a cocktail that might have seemed to work in the past but was bound to catch up to him. It's only by the grace of God he didn't hurt anybody else when he inevitably crashed his vehicle. The story that Ron Joyce tells is of a guy with a sore jaw who'd had a couple of drinks and took a few painkillers before hitting the road. However, the autopsy tells the story of a man with twice the legal limit of alcohol in his system, taking uppers to stay alert for a 4 a.m. drive home. One he should never have even attempted. Looking at the evidence, it makes you wonder how many times he'd actually gotten away with it before. Horton sped along Queen Elizabeth Way at 100 to 110 miles an hour. A driver alerted police that a sports car was driving dangerously fast and an OPP officer was dispatched and awaited Horton's car in St. Catharines. This was at about 4:30 in the morning. The officer couldn't keep up with Horton's excessive speed, and before he'd even realized he was being pursued, he'd lost the officer. The officer told the press that he was doing 100 miles an hour, and even at that speed, lost sight of Horton's vehicle. Moments later, that officer came upon the crash scene. Horton was the first NHL player to die from drunk driving, but unfortunately he wouldn't be the last, not nearly. Because they found his number in Horton's possession, Sabres head coach Joe Crozier was the first to find out about his death. It was a terrible shock to everyone that knew him. Amazingly, the Sabres actually played a game that night. Both the Sabres and their opponents, the Atlanta Flames, wore black armbands in honor of Horton. The details of Horton's crash report and autopsy were not released to the public. It wasn't until 2005 that a journalist with the Ottawa Citizen got a hold of the records and revealed the shocking details of Horton's intoxication. The Sabres and Flames skated numbly to a 4-4 tie that night. In 1974, the Buffalo Sabres used a draft pick on a Japanese center named Taro Tsujimoto. He was fast, skilled. He played for the Tokyo Katanas. There was only one problem. None of it was real. 11 rounds into the 74 draft, Sabres management was bored. The NHL draft was taking too long. Surely there weren't that many great junior players available. Most of the day was just guesswork anyway. In protest, the Sabres drafted a player that they'd created right there on the spot. That year, the NHL decided to hold its draft in secret. League officials were worried that the WHA would use draft results to lure players away from NHL teams. The danger was real. The WHA had lured away NHL stars like Bobby Hull, Gordie Howe, Frank Mahovlich, Jerry Cheevers, Ted Green, J.C. Tremblay, Mark Tardif, and kept them. The NHL's workaround was to conduct the draft by phone. No centralization, no spies, no witnesses. The problem was that none of the teams knew what the others were doing, and had to have League President Clarence Campbell read back the results before each pick. The process was tedious. The draft was scheduled to go as long as teams wanted to keep making choices. The draft lasted 3 days. Day 1 took 8 hours. Some clubs opted out by the 8th round. Others could only hold out a little longer. The Sabres held out. GM Punch Imlach was already fed up after the Day 1 marathon and walked into the Sabres draft room with a question on his lips. What the hell can we do to piss off Campbell? Imlach, coach Floyd Smith, scouting director John Anderson, and PR director Paul Wieland came up with a ridiculous idea. Anderson suggested drafting a deep-cut player that would have other teams scrambling to find out about. Wieland took the idea one step further. Draft a player that didn't exist from someplace off everyone's radar, like Japan, for example. Japanese, Imlach said. What the hell, why not? Wieland recalled driving by a store in his college days called Tsujimoto Garden and Gifts. There they got their last name. Then, Wieland called the store owners and asked for a common Japanese boy's name, and for the Japanese word for saber. The Tsujimotos offered Taro and Katana, and so a legend was born. Taro Tsujimoto of the Tokyo Katanas. According to a Sabres press release, he had scored a modest 15 goals and 10 assists in his draft year. Training camp neared and no one had caught on to the prank. The Sabres dedicated a stall in the locker room for Tsujimoto and even printed him up a jersey with the number 13. The other players were curious about the Japanese player. Could he be a new secret weapon? As time went on, anticipation grew. The team began making cuts, and the new foreign player still hadn't arrived. Rumors circulated that he was having problems getting his immigration papers in order. Even club owners Seymour and Northrop Knox weren't in on the gag. They kept asking Imlach when he might arrive. Imlach would reply that the kid still hadn't decided to turn pro, but the Sabres had his rights. How he did this with a straight face is anybody's guess. Eventually, the league caught on to the joke, and when they did, they removed Tsujimoto's name from official draft records. The 183rd spot in the 74 draft now reads, "Invalid selection." But the legend did not die there. He's become a folk legend in Buffalo. There was usually a Tsujimoto jersey or two at every Sabres home game. Fans would hold up signs saying, "Taro says," and predict the score, or leave some other funny message. Trading cards and novel-length biographies have been printed about Tsujimoto. There's even an Elite Prospects page dedicated to him. The NHL erased Taro Tsujimoto from the record book, but they couldn't erase the draft that produced him. The secret phone-in experiment was abandoned after that year. The draft would never again be conducted in total isolation. In trying to outmaneuver the WHA, the league created the conditions for its own embarrassment. Taro Tsujimoto never played a shift in the NHL, but he remains one of the most famous draft picks in Buffalo history.
Picture this. You're the most popular hockey player on the most popular hockey team in the world. Night after night, you feel the roar of the crowd in your packed home building as you play on the club's top line with your best friend. Your wife is home, 7 months pregnant. You feel safe, secure, optimistic. In a matter of hours, you find yourself standing at the blue line of a half-empty, unfamiliar building in an unfamiliar city. Your uniform is all the wrong colors, and the organist is playing the wrong home anthem, and nobody even knows how or why you ended up there. This is the story of when Lanny McDonald was traded to the Colorado Rockies. Everybody loves Lanny. Even today, nearly 40 years after his retirement, his visage remains one of the most iconic in hockey. In the late 1970s, he was a key member of a potentially championship-level nucleus. He enjoyed 4 consecutive 40-goal seasons as a Leaf and was prominent in community outreach, hospital visits, youth programs, Special Olympics. Lanny was already forging a legend both on and off the ice. And so, it was all the more shocking when he was unceremoniously traded to what was then the NHL's answer to Siberia, the Colorado Rockies. Maple Leafs fans expressed shock, disbelief, and anger at the news of the trade. Some even protested outside of Maple Leaf Gardens the following night. Toronto team captain Daryl Sittler cut the C off his sweater, resigning in protest. On the surface, it was a move designed to shake up the core of a team that had lost 2 consecutive years to the Montreal Canadiens in embarrassing series sweeps, and 3 consecutive seasons before that to the Philadelphia Flyers. They were contenders, they were close, they just weren't a championship-level team yet. Beneath the surface, fans understood that Lanny McDonald wasn't the problem. Ownership was. The many abuses of Harold Ballard as principal owner of the Maple Leafs are numerous and legendary. Ballard had been with the Leafs organization for decades. He has his name engraved on the Stanley Cup and was even inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder for his work with the Leafs. But by the time he had a controlling share of the team in 1971, he had developed a reputation as tight-fisted, combative, and controlling. According to one apocryphal tale, in 1964, the Beatles performed to a packed house at MLG on a hot and humid day. Ballard opened the doors early, tampered with the building's climate, and increased the cost of drinks at the concession stands. In another famous tale, when the league mandated nameplates on the backs of jerseys, Ballard made them the same color as the jersey so that fans couldn't read them in order to prevent a drop in program sales. He was 1 part P.T. Barnum and 1 part Boss Tweed. In 1972, Ballard was convicted of a whopping 47 counts of fraud, tax evasion, theft from Maple Leaf Gardens, and using Gardens funds to renovate his home. Despite spending a year in Millhaven prison, Ballard maintained an iron-fisted grip on the organization from behind the prison walls. Reporters described his level of control from behind bars as uncanny, authoritarian, and absurd. Upon his release, Ballard's domineering took on epic proportions. He became more petty and vindictive, more mistrustful of those under him. What had once been a hands-on approach now looked like a man asserting absolute authority, not only over the team, but over everyone within its orbit. By this time, Ballard's view of his players had hardened from perception into policy, resulting in disputes that effectively kneecapped the organization's ability to build a contender. Players with influence bothered him, the best players, men like former captain Dave Keon, who had become a symbol of independence inside the building. Ballard saw a unified, confident locker room as a threat to his authority, not an asset. Every dollar that went to one of his players was, in essence, a dollar taken out of his own pocket. The WHA was inflating salaries, and the NHLPA was gaining strength, which only deepened his hostility toward both. Sittler was vice president of the Players' Union, and had become the face of the franchise, beloved by fans and teammates alike. The Maple Leafs had built a solid core of Sittler, McDonald, Tiger Williams, defensemen Borja Salming and Ian Turnbull, and an acrobatic show-stopping goalie in Mike Palmateer. But at the heart of the team was Sittler. His growing influence in the building, and the greater community at large, threatened Ballard. So after 5 straight playoff disappointments and escalating tensions within the building, Ballard sought to tighten the reins. He wanted to stamp out the country club atmosphere around the Maple Leafs, and in the 1979 offseason, brought back Punch Imlach to run the team. Imlach had been the Leafs' head coach and GM during their glory days of the 1960s, and he was brought in to be Ballard's proxy. Back then, Imlach was answerable to a 7-member board that included Ballard, so he knew that he was bringing in someone agreeable and controllable. Imlach had a reputation as an abusive taskmaster, and it's believed by some that his Maple Leaf team sprouted into a dynasty not because of him, but in spite of him. Imlach believed that the Leafs had about 5 or 6 good players, and the rest of the roster needed to be overhauled. The macho head games began almost immediately. If the hiring of Imlach was the opening salvo in a war between players and management, then the warning shot came when outgoing GM Jim Gregory dealt popular and acrobatic goaltender Mike Palmateer to the Washington Capitals, arguably the worst team in the league, for draft picks. The trade signaled to players and fans alike that the organization was no longer interested in building a contender. It also made plain that management now functioned as the enforcement arm of ownership. As the season began, Imlach imposed a dress code. Players were no longer allowed to drink beer on the team bus or plane. The players bristled. Sittler and Imlach butted heads, but Sittler had a trump card. Sittler had a clause in his contract that required he be paid $500,000 to agree to any trade involving him. With the tight wad Ballard in the owner's box, Sittler was essentially immovable. It didn't stop Imlach from trying. He offered Sittler to Buffalo for Gilbert Perreault. The Sabres rejected the offer. He offered Sittler to the Flyers for Rick McClish and Moose DuPont. That deal never materialized either. Imlach and Ballard wanted to undermine Sittler's authority in the locker room and emphasize their own. Then they devised a spiteful plan. If they couldn't deal away Sittler himself, they'd just trade away his best friend, confidant, and right-hand man, Lanny McDonald. The trade was never about Lanny McDonald. It was about hurting Sittler and undermining his authority. As for the trade itself, Lanny was packaged with young, stay-at-home defender Joel Quenneville to a Colorado Rockies team that was desperate for both offense and defense. In return, the Leafs got forwards Wolf Paymon and Pat Hickey. The deal landed like a knockout blow after a series of earlier roster jabs, which saw Imlach deal away younger players for farmhands and the bizarre choice of re-signing retired 41-year-old defender Carl Brewer. Imlach may have been trying to recreate his blueprint for a championship team from the 1960s of relying heavily on cagey and trusted veterans. Brewer had long been an opponent of Sittler's negotiating agent Alan Eagleson. The move was strictly political. Brewer hadn't played in nearly a decade. In essence, he was the ultimate company man. It's a telling detail that Imlach had to look that far back to find a player who was more willing to side with management than his fellow players. Lanny was devastated. His family had settled in Toronto. They had just bought a new house, and he had no reason to believe he would be moved. No one did. Even Floyd Smith, the Leafs head coach, was caught off guard. The shock spread through the room and into the stands. Fans protested outside Maple Leaf Gardens the next night. Inside the organization, the meaning was clearer. This wasn't a hockey trade. It was part of a campaign to isolate Sittler by removing the players closest to him. Before the next game, Sittler quietly cut the captain's C off his jersey. He didn't grandstand, he didn't call a press conference. He just did what he thought was right. When management learned what he had done, they tried to hand the letter to Tiger Williams, a player Ballard adored. Tiger had even given Ballard a bearskin rug from a hunting trip, which Ballard kept beneath his desk. But Tiger was no company man. Out of respect for Sittler, he refused. The Maple Leafs played the rest of the season without a captain. The timeline suggests that it was another punitive move that sent Tiger to the Vancouver Canucks a month and a half later, another of the NHL's laughingstock franchises. He blossomed there, becoming that team's emotional leader and their goals leader the next season. Quenneville had been Salming's defense partner, and including him in the deal fit the pattern. Another piece of the core hurt, another working relationship broken. Camaraderie and chemistry evaporated. The roster subsequently stripped to the bolts. Between 1979 and 1983, the Leafs lost 12 consecutive playoff games. Paymon was a good player, a prototypical power forward. But when he arrived in Toronto, he entered a no-win situation. Early reports suggest the Leafs intended to flip him for more assets, and Mark Napier's name surfaced in speculation, but no deal materialized. Paymon was expected to report to the team that Saturday, but he refused, not because he was unhappy with the trade or unwilling to play for the Leafs, but because his wife was giving birth to their child. When Imlach was informed of the situation, he was less than sympathetic, saying he traded for the player, not his wife. Eventually, Paymon reported and finished the year second in team scoring. Sittler responded on the ice. He'd been scoring at around a point-per-game pace before the trade, but exploded with 69 in the final 44 games, including 5 nights with 4 or more points. Paymon led the team in scoring the following year. Hickey lasted a season and a half and was eventually moved for a 5th-round pick. Ultimately, Paymon did get traded, this time to the Quebec Nordiques for Miroslav Fraicher. Fraicher was dealt many years later for Darren Veach. Veach was dealt for Keith Osborne. Osborne was taken by the Tampa Bay Lightning in the expansion draft. In the 1980 offseason, Imlach suffered a heart attack. Ballard named himself acting general manager and struck a deal with Sittler. He would return as captain. Ballard also re-signed Borja Salming, offering a contract Imlach had refused. Imlach came back for training camp but suffered a second heart attack. Ballard told the media that Imlach was finished as general manager. Aside from Salming, after a whirlwind of activity, the team the Leafs iced at the end of the 1982 season was completely unrecognizable from the team they had iced at the beginning of the 1980 season. Toronto missed the playoffs that spring, losing 7-1 to Philadelphia in their final game. A Flyers team centered by Daryl Sittler. The teardown was complete. Things got so ugly on and off the ice that isolated groups of fans started showing up at MLG with brown paper bags over their heads. In an eerie coincidence, years earlier, Ballard once tried to force Leafs coach Roger Nielsen to wear a brown paper bag over his head during a losing streak. Nielsen refused. Eventually, Ballard died. His story came to a close, but the damage had been done. One of pro sports' most storied franchises had been run into the ground by years of driving away its stars, alienating its fans, and eroding its own identity. Lanny ended up going from one dysfunctional situation to another, but the difference between the two was jarring. From one moment to the next, he went from MLG, the center of the hockey universe, to half-empty McNichols Sports Arena. While the Maple Leafs had struggled to maintain a strong and proud identity, the Rockies didn't have one to begin with. They were a team with no roots and no stability. The Rockies won just 5 of Lanny's first 11 games with the club. He didn't pout, he didn't complain or withdraw, he just went out there and competed. By the end of the 1980 campaign, the Rockies had won 8 of the 46 games after his arrival. Don Cherry, the coach in Colorado, was one of hockey's biggest personalities. Loud, funny, and opinionated. He complained openly and often about some of his players, especially the goaltenders, but he had nothing but respect for Lanny, even calling him one of the finest men he ever coached. Lanny immediately became the heart and soul of the Rockies, their inspirational player and best forward. It became apparent that Toronto lost more than a consistent 40-goal scorer. They lost a culture carrier. McDonald stayed with the club for 2 years, leading them in scoring all the time, but seeing very little change in the way of results. Just before the Rockies shuttered operations and moved to New Jersey, they dealt McDonald, an Alberta native, to Calgary. After 2 years in hockey's wilderness, he was not only freed, he was going home. When he heard the news of the trade, Lanny wept. There, Lanny found a team on the rise. Hungry, hard-working, blue-collar, Western. Lanny fit the mold to a T. The fans embraced him as a returning native son, and Lanny responded with a career year, scoring 66 goals, still a club record. His scoring touch faded with age, as it does, but not his presence. When he settled into a bottom-6 leadership role, it fit him like a glove. He was co-captain of the team and an important presence in a room full of star talents. Off the ice, Lanny became the NHL's public face for charitable works, fully embraced and respected by the community at large. Meanwhile, the Toronto Maple Leafs floundered, lacking a strong veteran core in the room. In 1989, Lanny's final season, he scored his 500th goal and 1,000th point, erasing any doubt that he would be enshrined in hockey's Hall of Fame. That year, the Calgary Flames won the Stanley Cup. Lanny scored a goal in the deciding game in Montreal. When the Stanley Cup trophy was presented to the Flames, his teammates pushed Lanny forward so that he could be the first to lift it. The fact that it happened against the Canadiens, the very team that had authored the Maple Leafs' dismantling a decade earlier, was almost Homeric in proportion. It's the kind of storybook ending that a career like Lanny's deserved, an ending that Salming and Sittler never enjoyed. But they weren't the problem in Toronto. Ownership was. After Ballard's death, Maple Leafs ownership and management opened the doors to alumni, no longer making former players pay for tickets to enter the building. Cliff Fletcher, the man who brought Lanny home to Calgary, took over as GM in Toronto and made a reconciliation with Sittler on the team's behalf. Ultimately, all three of their numbers were retired: Sittler's and Salming's in Toronto, and Lanny's in Calgary. The trading of Lanny McDonald was neither the first nor the last blow in the Maple Leafs Civil War, but it was the point of no return. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and when the Leafs fell, they fell spectacularly. The Maple Leaf story exposes the dangers of a rebuild, especially an unrighteous rebuild caused by spite and pettiness. The Leafs have felt like a cursed franchise since that time. Team culture and identity can be a fragile thing. Toronto never seemed to find the right mix to correct theirs. Even now, more than 45 years later, they're still trying to find it. The Leafs were like a kid building a sandcastle on a beach, and the project was coming together. Then, a bully comes along and kicks the castle over, and here's the twist. That bully was the kid's own father.
Johnny Bower is remembered today as a Hall of Fame goaltender and a legend of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But for most of his career, the National Hockey League didn't seem to want him. By the mid-1950s, Bower had already won championships, shattered records, and built a reputation as the best goaltender outside the NHL. Yet every time he reached the league, he was pushed back out. By the time he was in his mid-30s, it looked as though his NHL opportunities had been exhausted. This is the strange story of how one of hockey's greatest goalies almost never got his chance. After a hard-fought 7-game victory in the Calder Cup final, including a heartbreaking quadruple overtime loss in Game 6, the Cleveland Barons were champions for the second time in 3 years. Their goalie, Johnny Bower, had built a reputation as a possible NHL talent in the 8 seasons he'd spent there. The Barons said they were willing to match any contract offer given to him by an NHL team, but felt they couldn't hold him back anymore, so they traded him to the New York Rangers. At the time, the Rangers had a reputation of being a goalie graveyard. They were the worst team in the league, winning only 17 games out of 70 in 1953. To make matters worse, their starting goalie that year was Gump Worsley, who was 4 years Bower's junior, and whose performance had earned him the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year, despite the poor record in the standings. Worsley had replaced former Hart Trophy winner and future Hall of Famer Chuck Rayner in net after a devastating knee injury prematurely shortened his career. Rayner would also attend training camp that year, but would act as more of a goalie coach than a player competing for a job. The Rangers decided that they would let Bower and Worsley duel it out in training camp for the starter's job. In those days, NHL teams didn't carry backup goalies on the playing roster. The stakes for the training camp duel were the difference between playing all year in the NHL or being banished across the continent to play for the Rangers' Western League affiliate, the Vancouver Canucks. Worsley was a Hall of Fame talent, but at 5'7" and visibly pudgy, the Rangers didn't believe in him. Bower got the nod. At age 28, he would be an NHL rookie. Under Rayner's tutelage, Bower added a new tool to his skill set, the poke check. Rayner would repeatedly drill Bauer on his poke-checking technique and coach him on when to decide to use it. Eventually, Bauer would become synonymous with the poke check and would go down as the goalie who made the technique famous. That year, Bauer didn't win the Calder Trophy, but he played every minute for the Rangers and helped the team to a 12-win improvement in the standings. His play was good enough that the Rangers submitted his name for Hart Trophy consideration. More importantly, with a healthy 2.54 goals against average and 5 shutouts on a poor defensive team, Bauer proved he belonged in the NHL. Late that season, Bauer's wife gave birth to their first child. The proud new father spent much of the off-season doting on his newborn son. Consequently, when Bauer returned to training camp in fall 1954, he was slightly out of shape. Worsley, on the other hand, still stung by the demotion, returned focused and in excellent condition. As the preseason progressed, Rangers bench boss Muzz Patrick felt that Worsley was spectacular, a complete goalie. His impression of Bauer, on the other hand, was that he let in too many soft goals, and as the exhibition schedule progressed, Bauer saw less and less crease time. By the end of the preseason, Bauer was assigned to Vancouver. Nobody outside the Rangers organization understood the move. From the outside, it was a puzzling turn of events, but from the inside, it was a shrewd and calculated decision. One rumor that would surface in Blue Line magazine was that Bauer wasn't very well liked in the locker room. His competitive nature and focus made him seem like an unforgiving perfectionist to the defenseman. He would be visibly upset with teammates for defensive gaffes, while forgetting to reward or encourage teammates for making good plays. This dynamic was demonstrated by Bauer not being seen at the usual hangout spots the Rangers team were known to frequent. He subsequently developed a reputation as a loner. Still, the Rangers would be better served by sticking with the goalie who gave them the best chance to win every night, and Bauer seemed to do that more consistently than Worsley had. And winning, ultimately, makes great friendships. So the loner theory didn't seem an adequate explanation. One other theory is that the Rangers never wanted any of their goalies to feel comfortable with their importance to the team so that they could never ask for more money with conviction. Bauer proved to be too good for the Western League, but he patiently waited for a chance to prove himself again. He wouldn't have to wait long. In the 18th game of the season, on November 21st, Worsley suffered a bone chip on his ankle while making a save. Though goalies had always worn pads on their legs, goaltending techniques of the time often exposed the inside of the leg while attempting a kick save. Bauer was recalled to fill in while Worsley recovered. When his shot came, Bauer was ready. With Bauer in net, the Rangers got the better of a home-and-home series against the Boston Bruins, winning once and tying once. Bauer allowed 3 goals total in the 2 games. Patrick heaped praise on his fill-in goalie in the press. Worsley anxiously waited for his body to heal, fearing he might lose his starter's job again. Patrick used the media to fuel the fire, declaring that he would continue to start Bauer as long as he stayed hot. After 4 games in relief, Bauer had only allowed 7 goals, winning 2, losing 1, and tying 1. To that point, the Rangers had only won 6 of 18 games with Worsley in the net. Still, Bauer's leash was shorter than even he might have realized. When Bauer got shelled for a 6-1 loss at the hands of the dynastic Red Wings in the next game, Patrick pulled the plug and handed the net back to Worsley. One bad game, and he was reassigned to Vancouver on December 7th. By the end of the season, Bauer won the Outstanding Goaltending Award for the Western League, leading the circuit with a 2.71 goals against average and 7 shutouts. He would beat out rival Glenn Hall for the honor, but Hall's Edmonton Flyers would get the better of Bauer's Canucks on the way to their President's Cup championship. By the end of the NHL season, the Rangers had once again finished with 17 wins. Muzz Patrick was fired, and the Rangers brought in Phil Watson to replace him. Watson seemed to prefer Worsley over Bauer. During training camp, Watson tried to tinker with Bauer's technique, resulting in more goals allowed.
When Bauer, frustrated with his authority-instituted lack of success, reverted to his familiar technique, and more success, Watson saw it as a sign of insubordination. Bauer was once again demoted, this time to the Providence Reds of the AHL. The Rangers improved by leaps and bounds in the standings, finishing with 32 wins under Watson and a playoff berth. They would go on to be the first of 10 straight victims of the Montreal Canadiens on their way to 5 straight championships. But Bauer's year in Providence would prove to be one of his happiest and personal best. After ferrying his family back and forth across the continent from New York to Vancouver and back to Providence, the Bauers fell in with the Lamoriello family. The patriarch of the clan, Nicholas, was a Reds season ticket holder. He worked in the food industry, making deliveries. By a chance encounter, he saw Bauer at a restaurant and introduced himself, congratulating Bauer on his tremendous play. The two became friends, and the Lamoriellos would have the Bauers over for dinner often. Bauer always seemed to play better after a meal at the Lamoriellos. 60 years later, Bauer would call Nicholas Lamoriello's son, Louis, to congratulate him on becoming the new general manager of the Maple Leafs. Another thing that made Bauer's time with the Reds a positive experience was the camaraderie. After every game, win or lose, the team would congregate around Bauer in appreciation of another fantastic performance. The Reds won 45 of 64 games that year, and Bauer would win the Les Cunningham Award as League MVP. The Reds would go on to win the Calder Cup, Bauer's 4th overall and 3rd as a starter. By then, it was no longer an opinion, but a known fact in hockey, that Johnny Bauer was the best player not in the NHL. With the Rangers having just enjoyed a resurgent year under a new head coach, there was almost no chance that Bauer could wrestle the starter's job away from Worsley. Worsley's play was receiving raves of its own. Before the season began, Terry Sawchuk left the Boston Bruins for personal reasons, and there were rumors that Bauer would be traded there. The deal never materialized. The Bruins opted for a younger solution in net. At 31 years old, and with his NHL window closing, Bauer quietly accepted another demotion. This time he was happy to return where he and his family had found friendship and acceptance in hockey. That season, Bauer solidified his place as a minor league legend. He broke the long-standing AHL career shutout record with 37, accumulated between his time in Cleveland and Providence, and finished the season 1 game shy of the career record in that category. He might have claimed the record that season had he not been called up for 2 games with the Rangers to fill in for the injured Worsley. Bauer lost both games and was hastily reassigned. But by season's end, the AHL once again recognized Bauer as league MVP. The Reds played a run-and-gun style of offense that often left their goalie out to dry. More often than not, Bauer would bail them out. Thanks to Bauer's steadying presence, the Reds claimed their 2nd straight regular season title, though they fell short in the playoffs when their offense failed them against Rochester. Bauer was just the 2nd AHL player to win back-to-back MVP trophies, and he had been the first goalie to win one altogether. That season, the Rangers finished in 4th place again, and lost to Montreal in 5 games of the first round once more. That summer, the Rangers wanted to move Marcel Paillet, another of the goaltenders down their depth chart, from the Cleveland Barons to another club. However, Cleveland was an independent team and not part of New York's farm system. Paillet's NHL rights belonged to New York, but the Rangers had an agreement with the Barons that the big league club couldn't send Paillet to another team. To get out of the deal, the Rangers offered Bauer, along with his full professional rights. Cleveland leapt at the deal and sent defenseman Ed McQueen and an undisclosed amount of cash over to New York to complete the transaction. Bauer's time with the Rangers was over. He had gotten his professional shot. He'd proven that he belonged among the game's greats. And though he was frustrated that he couldn't maintain ground at the highest level, his new deal ensured that he could retire with the club where his professional journey had started. Still, the thought of chasing NHL glory never left Bauer's mind. He couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if he'd ever gotten another real shot.
He finished the year in Cleveland with the all-time AHL record for most games played and wins for a goaltender, to go along with his shutout record, which now stood at 45. In the summer of 1958, new Toronto bench boss Punch Imlach, who had a reputation for favoring veteran players, convinced Maple Leafs brass to take Bauer in the interleague draft. For just the second time, and at age 34, Bauer had a legitimate shot at a full-time NHL job. But that's another story, and another career altogether.